Welcome to another episode of Shift with Elena Agar. In this conversation, I chat with Andrew Barry. He is the founder of Curious Lion. And what his company does essentially is helps individual contributors and leaders grow and perform in organizations. He shared his journey from corporate life in South Africa and then making a move to the US. And starting his own company and just kind of really working with organizations to help them grow, not just their managers, but really with a big focus on individual contributor, which is actually a very much untapped area in a sense, because we're so much focused on managers and leaders and all of that, which is amazing and needed. But then what about the individual contributor who just wants to be the best that they can be in their particular individual contributor role? So I found it very interesting to kind of just chat with a fellow learning development professional and the things that he's doing in this space. So whether you're a leader or L&D professional, just someone looking to maximize your career potential, I think this conversation is going to be interesting to you. So please do check it out. As always, share, subscribe, and let me know what you think. Andrew, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Elena, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to dig into some of the things that you and I have a common interest in.
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking with my peers and people that are just as passionate about people and talent and development and learning as I am. So I think it's going to be a great discussion. After many years of spending in corporate America and kind of leading teams and executive education at KPMG, and even prior to that, doing this work, you decided to jump ship, right, to do your own thing. And that's what you're doing with Curious Lion. Before we go into where you are today, take me a little bit back. How did you get into learning? How did you get into this field? And then ultimately, at what point did you say, this is the time to jump and create Curious?
Yeah. I mean, I will say off the bat, you're never ready. Like that was definitely a big lesson. But yeah, I mean, I got the bug for teaching when I left high school. I had normal jobs like every high school person had, and your regular like retail, working in hospitality, that kind of stuff. But a mentor of mine said to me, you were really good. I was a pretty high grade student at school, and he's like, why don't you teach maths, to mathematics to high schoolers? So I was like, you could do this? Like, I can just charge for my time, and he was like, yeah, just give it a try. So I did that, and I completely fell in love with it, and made a lot more money doing that than I was doing all the other jobs I was doing. So that really gave me the bug. I was still on this path at the time to become a chartered accountant back in South Africa. I was on that sort of, I guess, track to be a CEO of a company, and never thought at the time that it would be my own company. And so I worked at KPMG, a global consulting firm. I was there in South Africa for 3 years doing the auditing profession. And then the bug came back again when, for anybody who's been in that kind of an environment, you do a lot of training, a lot of professional developments. And so we would go to an offsite, and there would be instructors in the room, and they would be taking us through a week of training. And I was just like, I want to be those guys. Like, that just like looked so much fun, right? So I would go up to them and ask them how to get into that, and some people there took me under their wing, and I got into that part of the business of KPMG. And so that's how I got to America. I was flying around South Africa delivering training, and then I got an opportunity to come to America for 2 years to develop the training material. So I was like, that's going to be a great way to kind of learn how the sausage is made. And so I came here, with an L1 visa, 2 years, had an option to renew. I did that. And then 3 years into that third year, it was just clear I didn't want to leave my office back in Johannesburg. It was like, you're not coming back, right? And so we basically made it a formal thing. The US firm sponsored a green card for me, and I went all in on training here in the US. And so I ended up doing that for about 10 to 12 years, culminating in working in the executive education side of the business, where we were selling training basically to clients. And so I got a really good rounding of, facilitation to developing the material, to selling it. And I always just thought, I think like any entrepreneur, like I had my own itch. I was like, I think there's a better way to do this. I think it's inefficient. It's not, and you don't get to move the needle as much in a big company. And so that was always in the back of my mind. And so, yeah, I mean, we can talk, we can unpack the moment when I moved a little bit more, but it was not at all like I worked up the courage to start my own thing. I left KPMG and I went to a startup for a year and a half. They were in the hospitality industry and doing training, selling training to hotels essentially. So that was a good like stepping stone to sort of. I had to like run my own book of business and I ran the learning function for this company. I started the New York office, so that was like, like at KPMG, everything was done for me, and I just had to like show up and do what I had to do. And so that was a good lesson. But then starting my own company, I mean, that was just the hardest thing I've ever done, by a long way. And yeah, we can get into it now. But like my initial
Mm.
plan there was I'm going to do compliance training for banks, and we're going to do these like really cool videos. We're going to make compliance training so much better because it's boring as shit right now, and like we're going to make it like amazing. And yeah, I've never sold anything to a bank. And well, actually, that's not true. We've worked with one bank before. But it wasn't compliance training. It wasn't video based. But that's what gave me the courage to do it, and then just figured it out as we went along. And yeah,
Yeah. No, it's interesting because most people, like you said, like I think it's just you come to entrepreneurship where you're like, I think I can do this better, right? Like I think there's some things and then when you're working with large corporations, it's a little bit difficult to make that impact. So you're a little bit more agile when you're on your own. So
yeah,
it's an itch that definitely needs to be scratched. It's a very similar story to mine. I was like, I just want to do something different. I want to try it and I want to experiment, you know?
yeah,
What's been the biggest lesson for you in terms of like when you kicked off this journey
yeah.
as like on your own, what has been like the biggest things you learned about yourself throughout that process?
Yeah, about myself. I mean, one of the biggest lessons at the beginning, this is a little bit about myself, but also I'll answer that as well. But I think, well, first of all, the biggest lesson was that you don't know what the market wants until you into the market. Like I had a very
Yeah.
clear idea of what I thought they wanted, and then, like I said, no bank ever bought compliance training from us, but we were scrappy. We picked. I mean, I was using we back then. It was just me, but I was
Yeah.
using the royal we.
That's the key.
Um,
Right. I
yeah,
think
yeah,
everybody does that.
and do what you can to like get those first
Yeah.
few clients, figure out what
Yeah.
they need, give that to them, and then go from there. So that was one of the big lessons, and that's we still do that to this day. I think we've got much clearer on our identity now as a leadership development firm, but a lot of that has been in response to clients' needs that we've solved, and then found those same problems at other companies. So that's one of the big things. I think like for me personally, it's that I didn't know what I didn't know, and like I thought I did. I thought I was like, I'm ready. I know, okay, I've got it, figured it all out. But man, I got my ass handed to me a few times to like really learn that lesson the hard way,
Mm.
and so that has, I think, for me, developed this sort of. I'm big on this idea, and we're trying to teach this now in our programs of intellectual humility. Just like you don't know what you don't know, and you probably only know a fraction of what's out there, and that's actually okay. That's
Mm-hmm.
actually totally okay. And if you instead lean into that and just be like a constant, continuous learner,
Yeah.
like the sky's the limit.
Yeah, no, it's so spot on. You don't know what you don't know. It's yeah, and it's I guess it's like, like anything, there's so much risk that you take with anything. And it's just like how do you minimize the risk of something going wrong? I guess that's the best thing you can do.
Yeah,
That's
that's
like the
exactly
best
it.
thing you can do.
Yeah, yeah, because something will go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So talk to me a little bit about, what in, when you kick this off, what are some things you're like, here's what we as trainers, as L&D professionals can do different. Like, what are some things
Mm,
that you've seen and that you're trying to address with your company at the moment?
yeah, I think the biggest one, it hit home for me in a program I was taking part in. So everything I'd never formally studied learning or pedagogy or anything like that. It's all sort of developed through practice, which I actually think, by the way, is a great lesson for anybody. Like, don't let some like certificate or standard or whatever stand in your way. Just go out there and figure it out. Like, it's the best way to do it. That has definitely been my experience. But so I was in the early days of Curious Lion. We were doing kind of instructional design work and some production for companies. I was taking a lot of online courses, and I was in one particular one, and I've talked about this before, but it really it's a course that's no longer, it doesn't exist anymore. It actually wrapped up last year, but it's called Rite of Passage. It was an online writing course that started just before COVID, but then all these online courses kind of blew up during COVID. And it's like this virtual online community that gets together. There's an instructor that kind of leads the way, and in this case was this guy David Perel, who had built up a really big online following with his writing, and he was teaching the framework and approach that worked for him. And what I learned from going through that was that I learned way, way more from. I mean, David was great because he kind of like, I talk about destination groups and journey groups. So David set the destination. It's like, this is what I've done, and here are the steps I followed, and I'm going to explain those to you. But if that's all you do, you're not going to be able to take those 12 steps or whatever those steps, however many steps there are, because what all of us as learners are just trying to figure out how to take the next step. And the best way I've realized to do that is to talk to someone who's just taken that step, because they know what it's like to take that step and what it's like to be at the step you're on. And actually similarly to also talk to people who are one step behind you, because they're asking you questions about where you are that's kind of helping you deepen that understanding. And that's the journey group. So if David and they're setting the destination, you've got this journey group of people going through the course with you. And I learned so much from those people that I initially, I battled like imposter syndrome. I was like, I don't know anything compared to these guys, but just opening up and talking to them, I realized like, wow, I have so much to learn from this group of people. And so for us, one of our 5 principles is that we learn best from each other. And that was a massive realization. And that's why pretty much everything we do is cohort-based learning.
I love that. I tend to agree. I mean, there's so much, I go to a lot of events and conferences, and there's always like a new learning management system, a new, this self-guided content thing. And it's useful in
Right.
some cases, maybe. But I'm always thinking like at the end of the day, if I'm a person who wants to learn, I'll use that opportunity like on my own, right? I can create
Yeah.
that, like I can create my own learning. And as a company, I think the best thing people can do is actually create opportunities for them to learn from each other, like for people to learn
Yeah.
from each other, like almost like an apprenticeship for the younger people, mentorship for the mid, and then for senior leaders, kind of that like peer learning. Because at the end of the
Yes.
day, like that's how people best learn, especially because you're not solving like a math problem where it's like there's definite outcome, like there's definite,
Yes.
specific result. That's just one
Yeah.
result that can come out of this equation. You're dealing with people, and so like, and there's and there's different ways to approach a problem.
Yeah.
So I can see how that works.
Yeah. Yeah. That was huge for us. Yeah, we talk a lot about wicked problems. That's exactly what our programs and leadership work help people solve wicked problems. What you're describing, there's no known framework for solving it. There's actually no right answer to it either.
No.
And so so it's also there's an element of collaborative problem solving that happens in this. You're learning obviously as you go, but you're also solving problems with each other, for each other. It's an incredibly generative process.
And I think also like if we think about like AI and how it's replacing a lot of the content driven pieces, a lot of the certain parts of training, right? That there's whole people that are developing learning content, all of that. I think like this model that you guys have actually is the model that works, and you don't have to worry
Mm.
about being like outplaced or whatever by AI or anything like that, because
Yeah,
it's already like that's not really, you know what I'm saying, like that's not how learning really happens. As sexy as it
yeah,
sounds to a
yeah,
lot of companies, and as much as people sell it, I still see that this whole like interactive learning is not going to go away anytime soon.
yeah.
What do you see?
I agree, and I think that's an important nuance for people that are responsible for development of others, is to think about like there's a place for an LMS or an AI tool that personalizes learning to individuals, and that's for I think it's for baselining a lot of
Mhm.
skills, baselining knowledge as well. So very much like knowledge transfer. Um, it's for scale, like it solves a scale problem, but it doesn't. And those are all important problems. You got to get those right as well. But it doesn't raise the ceiling. So you've got you've got to raise the floor and you've got to raise the ceiling. Our business work helps companies raise the ceiling. There's a lot of great tools out there that help you raise the floor. You've got to do both. You got to prioritize. Most people start with raising the floor, which I think makes sense, and then raise the ceiling for your like very top groups, and then eventually roll that down to lower levels. But yeah, I think that's an important way to think about.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. That there's a time and a place for certain tools and interactions. Um, I'm curious in your because you do a lot of leadership development, right? Like these kind of cohorts. What are the biggest, I guess, themes or problems or pains that companies come to you for that they want
Mm.
training for their leaders?
Yeah, so we focus, and again, this is like in response to the market, right? We've started to
Yeah.
niche down and really focus on the individual contributor population. And I'm actually glad you asked this question because I think this is a very important topic, irrespective of like, we're not the only ones that are, I think, trying to solve this, although surprisingly few are, right? So I think, first of all, there's the individual contributor and then there's the manager population. And most companies start by prioritizing executives, senior leaders, managers, and that's right. You should do that. You get, they're the most expensive, most high leverage roles, but they also you get some like cascading effects down, right? If you get really good manager training, it's going to impact your ICs and all that. So that's important. I think what we've started to see is that companies are, whether it's like a resource constraint or, maybe sometimes just like they've just kind of neglected it. They're not looking at the ICs as well as an individual like focus area. And so we do that. And we've been able to work with companies that are like, they kind of focus on the managers. We zero in on the individual
Mm,
contributor. And so what we're seeing in that population, so actually, before I even talk about the skills in that, I think there's an interesting aspect of AI playing into this because what we're starting to see is this, like I want to kind of call it like super IC roles develop, where there's a lot of aspects that are play here, but you get someone who's really good at their job. They're like they're on like promotion tracks and stuff, but they also don't want to deal with managing people. Like that's a very specific skill
yeah.
set, right? And so like that's another aspect, and people staying away from that. But I still want to progress in the company, and I still want to make an impact. Now with I think that becomes way more viable, right? Because you can, and this, everyone who's played around with AI knows that you can do way more by yourself than you ever
Hmm.
could before, right? You can use AI as a thought partner. It can generate content. It can do like lots of things for you that you don't need other people for. So you can suddenly take a sort of carve out a function or a role and get so much done as an individual, way more than before, right? And so I think you're starting to see this as well at companies that are AI native, is you get this shift from like siloed specialists to generalists. So people who can understand the business at like an enterprise mindset, and then kind of understand like how different functions work, and then use AI to bring in
Hmm.
maybe that specialist viewpoint and some, for different aspects of it. And I think that's a really interesting trend that's going to continue. And
Hmm.
so that's another reason why we want to lean into this population. And so what are the skills then that are important here? A big one is be able to work across functions. So I mentioned enterprise mindset, but even just the ability to like understand different perspectives. Like why does legal keep sending you those requests or keep denying those requests of yours, whatever? Like understanding that why is that happening helps to problem solve, right? Like we were
Yeah.
saying earlier, as opposed to just like, they're such, like they're so annoying, whatever. Like, but really, like, so there's like a almost a perspective gathering skill that needs
Yeah.
to happen there. That's a big one. And then going back to this thing of AI, so previously the bottleneck was right at the beginning of the sort of idea to prototype cycle, right? Now with AI, you can take an idea and got a fully working prototype in the same day, right? And so now the bottleneck is to be able to like test the prototype. You have to get other people on board, right? You have to like
Hmm.
to test it in the real world. You've got to get others aligned. You can't do that part on your own, right? Because there's customers, there's product, there's all sorts of things that play into that. So the skill becomes, how do you get attention, right? How do you start to influence other people to go along with this point of view that you've developed. The
Yeah.
bottleneck is moving downstream or actually upstream to the attention. And so the skill of like influencing others without authority, that's
Mm-hmm.
commonly what has been called, is huge. And we see that across a lot of our clients. And that kind of starts with gathering perspectives. You have to
Mm-hmm.
understand how these different people that you're trying to influence, think so that you can then communicate in a way that influences them.
Yeah, I think that's such an excellent point because it addresses a like definitely that talent mobility challenge, right? Like as
Mm,
company, right? Like the whole because that's the whole thing. Like companies would love to have that in place, but they don't even know where to start. And this is kind of a part I see what you guys are doing because then it's like you were able to have a larger understanding, so you can kind of be like a Swiss knife. You can be plugged in wherever you need to be plugged in, and company still has utilization of you versus you are very specialized in a skill and you're
yeah.
just kind of stuck and then a company has to lay you off, which is not good for anybody. All right. So I
Exactly.
think there's that is really cool. I think it's also a untapped area, and I'm glad you're addressing it because usually what happens in organizations, managers will focus on like low performers and they'll just give all the attention to low performers. And that's like where all the
Hmm.
attention goes. Or you have the high performers, which need different kind of motivation. They're kind of on their own. But then this middle part of individual
Yeah.
contributors that want the development but don't have the time from their managers, don't know what to do, and don't have the access to those things. So if you're able to create that space for them, if I understood it
Mm,
correctly, I think that's
that's
that's that's
exactly right.
that's that's beautiful. I think that's yeah, that's
Yeah.
tapping into this area that because I see this in our work, like this is the area that like this the regular contributors who are just kind of don't need a lot of attention, don't on the good or the bad side, right?
Yeah.
But they're just kind of
Yeah.
like there and nobody's given them
Yeah.
they have the potential, but nobody's given them that skills and that drive.
Yeah. I love that point. I've never really thought about the over indexing or focused on the low performer. So that's a really interesting point, and very true. And then you mentioned potential. Like I think that's I think if you develop the ability to influence and even just developing a point of view, like and then influencing others with that point of view, that is a way to surface potential, right? Those people. They're also at the front lines of your business in most cases. They're talking to customers every day. They're working in the product. They're like seeing things that management only sees a week or two or a month later when reports come in, right? So like,
Mhm.
it feeds up to them. So like that's really important. So they're seeing things right away. If they can turn that insight or observation into a point of view and then deliver it in a way that captures attention, you're just increasing your chances of really valuable ideas and decisions being surfaced, which is
Yeah.
I think good for an organization across the board.
Yeah, you're just maximizing on the talent that you have without waiting for the manager to tap into that potential of that individual.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see this quite a bit in like software development world, because those individuals tend to be a little bit more of just like I'm just gonna do my work. I'm just gonna etc.
Yeah.
I'm not going to step over or I'm not gonna put myself in the limelight, so to say. But if there's a
Yeah.
way to lead without authority, and because they are very curious, very driven, very analytical, they often kind of be able to predict the problem solvers, right? And they usually
Exactly.
probably have a problem solving a problem they can solve at any point, but nobody, unless
Yeah.
somebody knocks on the door and say, "Hey, Andrew, what you think about that problem?" They're not going to speak up unless they
Yeah.
have the skills to do that. So
Yeah.
I'm glad somebody's addressing because there's so much talk about managers, which I think is super important. But then
Yeah.
this like, how do you create ownership and drive within the individual contributors? Because then it's like you said, everybody benefits. I love it. No, very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ownership. I know you mentioned ownership as well. I mean, we hear the word agency a lot. Like we want our people to have more agency, and that's kind of a great way to summarize a lot of what we said is
Mm.
see something, say something, like that kind of
Yeah.
thing, and like, but then have this toolkit to do that. So you're not, yeah, and that's the unaddressed area right now.
Yeah. That's interesting. And have you guys seen like do you work with a lot of I wouldn't like is there a specific profile like do you work with a lot of Gen Zs, a lot of like people across board? Like what are some
Yeah,
I guess profiles or generations that you work with in companies typically?
yeah, yeah, it's interesting actually. I think it is a lot of Gen Z actually now that I've thought about it. and it's very cross-functional. A lot of our work is cross-functional, which is actually a great. I kind of recommend that to people for folks listening. Like, bring cross-functional cohorts together for this kind of stuff. Like, let's say like you want to increase the level of influence, the ability to influence, or you want to teach problem-solving skills. Do that cross-functionally, because the skills themselves, like we've talked about, gathering different perspectives, all of that, as they're practicing those skills, they're actually getting those perspectives. Like we've often had people come out of a breakout where they've gone to go practice. We have this narrative dialogue as a sort of a questioning technique. So they go and practice it with each other, and they come out and they're like, finally get it how engineering thinks, or like
Yeah.
so they get these like extra benefits from this the other than just the skill development that
Mm-hmm.
that it's definitely going to benefit the business, which is
Yeah.
that's one of the things we're trying to figure out now is how can we measure that, like how do you actually translate that to impact in the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just the whole idea of just a day in a life of ex-colleague or
Yeah,
Y colleague in a different department that's working on the same product as you, who might
yeah,
not, he might be the engineer, you might be the designer, and you never meet each other, and
exactly,
you have no idea what the other person does, and it's like, oh, those engineering guys or the designer.
yeah,
It's like this, yeah, I love it. I'm
yeah,
sold. I
yeah,
love it. No, I love it
yeah.
because I think it is a unique population. And I think it is, at least, I mean, I've been in this field for a while, so I don't see anybody specifically focusing on that. And I think just that ability to, do the cross-functional and stuff like that.
Mm,
So it's super cool. Very cool. So what are some maybe symptoms or signs that a company needs
mm,
to do something like that for their team?
yeah, great question. Yeah. So one of the common ones, the biggest ones we see is just slow decision making. So it's like, oh, we have like meetings about meetings. A meeting ends, like no one's quite clear what the next steps are. What was that meeting actually about? Oh, we need another
Mm,
meeting, and then just slow decision making. Like no one, that comes back to this influencing thing. Like no one like putting together a really clear thing saying, I think we should do this by this date. If we do it, this will happen. If we don't, this will happen. And then putting that out there, and then seeing and putting that out there for reaction, right? It's not like, this is kind of going back to intellectual humility. We try and teach people as well that your point of view doesn't have to be right. In fact, no idea comes out right. It is only right, or only even creative, when others agree that it is. And the
mhm,
only chance others will have to agree is for you to put it out there. Nothing comes out perfectly the first
mhm,
time. So keep trying, keep putting it out. If it doesn't work, go back, figure out what you can tweak, try it again. And eventually it will come out, and people will be like, that is incredible, penetrating insight. We have to do this. And they'll wonder, how did you come up with that? And you can then tell them it took me 6 months and like 600 attempts.
yeah.
And that's reality. That's how it
Mhm.
works.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. No, that's super interesting. Where do you see as by the way, a lot of the companies you work for, you guys do this remotely or in person as well? Like how does that work? Or
Yeah,
both?
it's a bit of both. Yeah. It typically we would start with an in-person. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
again, this is my recommendation to people, because it's hard. It's definitely hard. A lot of companies we work with are remote and
Yeah.
or have like offices all over the world. Like start with an in-person if you can. Build it around something that's already in the calendar. Bring that cohort together. Get them to meet each other. Do some kind of intervention together, and then you can do it virtually. And yeah, I mean we take a lot of pride in creating like Zoom like you've never seen it before. There's a lot you can do with a Zoom call to make it engaging and not just like
Hmm.
another boring meeting where you're listening to
Yeah.
someone talk.
No, for sure. As you're speaking, what else comes to mind? Um, and this is not this might be less interesting to the actual companies, but I think for individuals who are like hesitant to do stuff like that because a lot of people I'm sure like be like, oh, why do I need to know about how to do X? I need to do my job and etc. One of my
Yeah.
best experiences I've had is I worked this was in Dubai, and I worked for an institution that was like we would just do like a lot of different things, and a big part of what we do is events. And I used to be like,
Mm.
why for God's sakes do I need to learn how to manage an event? And it was like, and then my boss at that time, she would explain to me why it's actually part of my job in the career development space, like why this is important, like, and it's because I'm bringing people together, I'm educator,
Yeah.
and I remember she said that when you walk away from this, you'll be able to start your own business, because she would put us in like although I was in career development area, she would put us to manage events, she would put us to do marketing,
Mm,
she would put us to do like all these things, to where I became a generalist, and I was able, that was the
yeah.
first time I quit that full-time job, and I went to start my first business in 2019 after 4 years, I think, yeah, at that
Mm,
organization. And I was like, oh, I was
mm,
like, and it was true. And I think to maintain relevance in the workplace, you almost have to have all these different skill sets. And for the
yeah.
company to invest in something like that in individuals is almost like good business, because not only will they retain people, because people won't be so in panic mode, like, am I going to be laid off, etc., because they'll feel
Yeah.
comfortable and confident, like, oh, I
Yeah.
can actually add other value to the company and not
Yeah.
just this area, because that a lot of people get nervous. They're like, oh my God, like my function's going away. But
Yeah.
if you can do all these other things, and the
Yeah.
opportunities are there. So anyway, it's yeah, it's
I,
yeah.
no, I just love that story because it's, everyone can do that, right? Like everyone can go like, oh, let me, and that's a good thing. I mean, everyone can go, let me try that. Like, oh, can I try to take that project on? Can I try to figure this out? Because it's that generalist skill set that if you bring AI into this conversation again, is, if you just stick in your lane and just specialize in that lane, you are, it's all your eggs in one basket, right? Like you
Mm,
will at some point, like and it's already happening in a lot of things, like AI is going to be able to do that specialist thing way better than you, right? And
yeah,
like make a lot of what you do redundant. But if you can go across functions, across problem sets, like deal with a different complex problem every single time and direct AI agents that are specialists in each of these areas, that's the superpower. That's what's going to set you apart from everybody else.
yeah. No, spot on, spot on. I just, I hope people that are listening to this, because I have a lot of people who are either in organizations working or in this kind of L&D space, they understand I can see the benefit for all sides, for individuals, for managers, for companies. Like there's just clear value there for sure.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's super interesting. And yeah, I mean, there's so much, even like how much money they can save in terms of retention or laying people off, or
Yeah.
yeah. So there's so much there. That's awesome. If
Yeah.
somebody wants to chat with you or just kind of get in touch, what's the best way to get in touch with you as an individual? If anybody has questions for you, and then where
Mhm.
is, your company, how do they get in touch with you for that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm really active on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm sure you probably put the link in the show notes or something. People can
Yep.
check it out there. But that's the best place. Connect with me there. I post quite regularly. And then if you go to curiouslinelearning.com, that's our company. You'll learn all about our focus on individual contributors. We have a bunch of programs in our catalog and workshops. And I have a newsletter. You and I were talking about that just before as well. So
Yep.
if you go to curiouslinelearning.com/newsletter, you can check it out there. And yeah, I mean, the most like the most up to date relevant stuff is always on LinkedIn. That's kind of where I
Yeah.
test out my ideas, put new stuff out. So yeah, that's the first place to try for sure.
Beautiful. And how did you come up with the name? How did you choose a name? I'm always curious.
Yeah. So I am a Leo by star sign and all that,
Yeah.
but and I'm from South Africa, so I've always had this affinity to lions, right? So,
Mm,
so that was always going to be part of it. And then I just think curiosity, and it's like I'm like finally, what, 8 years later, being like everyone's now talking about curiosity, so it's just awesome.
yeah.
But I always thought curiosity was like kind of my superpower, and I always thought it's just something that anybody can develop and is a superpower. So yeah, it was the combo of those, and then also I like the fact that curious line could also mean like strange and different, So like
Yeah.
that little aspect of it as well.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for the chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.